Hello, everybody. My name is Marsha Salzwedel, and I'm with the National Children's Center, National Farm Medicine Center, where I am a project scientist and I do a lot of farm safety and health work. I actually specialize, one of the areas that I specialize in is agritourism safety. So I've been doing this for about 11 years and am really, really happy to be here. So I will mention right up front that I'm happy to entertain questions at any point in time. So if you have questions, just feel free to shout it out. Because of the virtual aspects for this presentation, I'm going to try to repeat your question into the microphone so that the virtual people can hear it. So I'm not trying to make you feel odd by repeating your questions, but we need to do that for the virtual one. So we're not advancing. You can just pop them all up. Okay. So these are the objectives for today. We're going to talk about agritourism activities, risks and hazards that are associated with them. Its second one says that we're going to do this in groups, but we are not going to break into groups because of the virtual nature that we have. So we'll do that as a big group instead. We're going to actually talk about some actual injury incidents and brainstorm on prevention strategies, introduce tools to help identify risks and hazards, and explore resources that you can use to help mitigate those hazards. So, okay, so just a little bit of background on me. And we actually have a farm. I grew up on a farm and we still own and operate that farm. When I was very young, we did dairy, but we now do beef cattle, maple syrup, Christmas trees, and wreaths. And so you can see here, this is, of course, myself a couple years ago before I got a haircut. And this is my sister, my niece. This is another niece, my nephew, but we're actually out in the wreath house making Christmas wreaths. So that's just something that we do. And so now I'm going to just mention that I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, or I'm going to ask you to come up with questions. And they're not rhetorical when I ask this. So please, when I ask you guys questions, so would you please respond so I don't feel like an idiot standing up here all by myself with nobody answering me, okay? So how would you define agritourism? Anybody? Farms that welcome visitors, farms that have an educational aspect. Great. Both of those are really good. Yes? Okay, so you would broaden it to include processing facilities and breweries and other things, not necessarily just agricultural operations. Okay, all right. Okay. Okay, so everything that helps to sustain that farm and makes it sustainable, the area and everything supporting it. Okay, all right. So it includes the farmer and the visitor and bringing the people together. Okay. Do you necessarily think that there has to be a money exchange involved? Do people have to pay for it to be considered agritourism? I'm seeing some head shaking no. Okay. And I would agree with that. We do bring visitors onto the farm on our maple syrup part especially, we bring a lot of school groups on and we teach them how maple syrup is made. For everything from tapping the trees all the way through the cooking process, and even give them some samples for them to try. And we don't charge a penny for that. So, but from a risk management standpoint, where there's still some liability involved there, right? There's still a risk to bringing those visitors onto the farm, even though we are not collecting any money in that process. So we're still going to consider that as agritourism as well. So as I mentioned, this is going to be very discussion based. So please feel free to ask questions at any point in time. As I mentioned, please answer the questions as well. The other thing that I did want to mention is I want to just make a couple of notes here. So when we are talking about how much risk does a farmer or a producer want to take, or any type of agritourism operator want to take on their farm, there is actually a continuum of risks that they can have. And it can be anywhere from them not doing anything on their farm safety wise or to health wise, all the way up to following every best practice that's out there. And of course, if they do nothing to make sure that their operation is safe, that they're following all of those best practices, that's going to be very high risk for them. If they follow all the best practices that are out there for whatever they have on their farm, that's going to lower their risk significantly. But where they want to be on that continuum is going to be totally up to the farmer or the agritourism operator. So that we can make suggestions, we can make recommendations, but we cannot force anybody to do anything. So just be aware that when we're talking about and making recommendations today, the majority of what we're talking about today is going to be on that best practice side of very, very high recommendations. And there aren't some agritourism operators or farmers that are not going to want to do that. And that is their choice. It's, again, how much risk is acceptable to the individual farmer or operator. Okay. One other thing I wanted to mention, I am a safety and health professional as well as a farmer. I am not a lawyer. So part of this presentation was developed with advice and input from lawyers and from insurance operators. But you will hear me say periodically throughout the presentation, please check with your lawyer on this. And the reason for that is because the laws vary a lot, not only from state to state within the US, but between the US, the European Union, and all the other countries in the world. The regulations and the laws are going to be different. So I'm going to be talking very much in generalities today, and we'll be talking about best practices, but nothing that I'm talking about today for the most part is going to be law. Okay. So what types of agritourism activities are you guys familiar with? Somebody shout out agritourism activities you've seen or do. Pardon? Corn mazes and U-picks. What else? Hay rides? Petting zoos? Culinary? The foods and farm to table type stuff? Yes. Heard something back here. I'm sorry. I have the farmer hearing. Sorry. Okay. Dance venues, party venues like birthday parties and that type of stuff. So I'm going to need you guys to shout really loud because I can hear the speaker in the next room almost as good as I can hear, probably better than I can hear you guys. So. Farmers markets, absolutely. Playgrounds, yep. Play areas. Yep, photography venues. I've seen a lot of that where they'll have, like you mentioned, the sunflowers there, and they will take pictures in front of those areas and you can pay for those. So yes, pretty much anything that you can do with anybody on a farm. Farmers are very innovative. Producers are very innovative, and they can come up with a lot of different things, can't they? So we did a survey in 2014, and we asked what the most common types of agritourism activities were. And you can see these were just the most popular ones. Everything from farm markets, tours, and educational activities were at the top of the list. But there wasn't a whole lot of difference running all the way down to the weddings and parties. We repeated this survey. It had a little bit of a less response in 2018, but the results were really pretty similar with the survey that we did in 2018. So you can see that there's a lot of variation here. And one of the other things that we know is that there are new activities that are coming up all the time. So I am from the state of Wisconsin, which has a pretty good winter season. And we have some very innovative farmers there. And one of our farmers actually introduced iced silo climbing one winter. So they actually put cleats on their visitors and let them rappel up and down silos that they had sprayed with water and formed ice on. I often wondered what the insurance was on that, but I wasn't going to ask. So, but we know that there's a lot more than what's up here. But these are the most common ones that the survey revealed, at least here in the United States. Although this was part of the survey did go through NAFTMA, and so there are a few international results included in this as well in the 2014 one. So why do we think visitors are a safety issue? Pardon? They're untrained. Farms are dangerous. How many visitors nowadays are familiar with farms? Pardon? Yeah. So most young people nowadays are at least 4 to 5 generations removed from the farms in the US. I'm curious, how many of you are from outside of the US? Okay, there's a few of you. Is it the same in your countries, or is there more familiarity with farms there? So in your country, is the general population pretty familiar with where their food comes and farms, or no, not in yours? No. So pretty much probably the same thing, right? And so that's a big goal for a lot of agritourism operators, is just to familiarize people with farms. I had a young kid once when I was visiting in a grade school, and I asked him if he knew where steak come from, and he said, "Oh, absolutely, it comes from the grocery store." And he honestly thought that they magically produced steak at a grocery store, had no idea that it actually came from cow or steer. So it was an interesting thing. Why else are visitors a safety issue besides their unfamiliarity with farms? They get very excited and they don't pay attention to what's right in front of them, right? Liability, unpredictability behavior wise. Anybody else? Okay, few of the things farmers have shared with me in the past, you guys hit on some of these. They're unfamiliar with agriculture and the environment. Some people think that the parents bring the kids to the agritourism operations and they're looking for a babysitter. They have this idyllic view of a farm and they feel like they can walk into the farm, and as soon as they enter that gate and pay that entry fee, they can just release the kids and they don't have to watch them. When in fact, we know that farms are really a very dangerous place to be. Easily distracted, you hit on that before. Rules don't apply to me. So I was working with a farmer in Florida, which is a southern state in the United States here. And he said that in his operation, the way he had it set up, his house was sitting right next to where people would get on for the hayride. Now, the house was fenced with a white picket fence. There was a sign on the white picket fence that said staff only beyond this point. There was a sign on his door that said private property, do not enter. And he went in for lunch one day and there was a couple standing in his living room that he had never seen before. And he said to the couple, he said, "Excuse me, but what are you doing in my living room?" And they said, "Well, we wanted to see what a farmhouse looked like." And he said, "Okay, did you not see the sign on the fence and on the front door that said this was private property?" "Oh yeah, but we just figured you didn't want kids in here, so we wanted to see what the house looked like, so we came in anyway." I can't tell you how many farmers have told me stories along those lines. The rules don't apply to me. It's just a real common thought. And I heard in the session earlier this morning that common sense was not common. Some of the farmers tell me they think it's completely dead. It's just non-existent anymore. So there's a lot of reasons in addition to this, but these are some of the more unique ones that I've heard from farmers. So I ask farmers, when you think about visitors, what do you worry about? What do you worry about? Thoughts? Injuries? Liability? I'm sorry, louder? Bios, okay, yep, biosecurity. That's getting to be a bigger one and bigger one nowadays. COVID? Yes, that's been a big worry for the last couple of years. Are they having a good time? Absolutely. Yeah. So how do we keep it safe and use the proper signage, but not inhibit people from having fun? Yeah. Mhm. Right. So you want to make sure that they're ambassadors for your for your organization, for your operation, for your farm, whatever you want to call it. So you want to be careful about how you communicate with them via signs, via what people say to them, all that type of things, because you want them to come back and you want them to tell their friends, right? Absolutely. So why does safety matter? And these are United States statistics, but I've worked with Canada and I've worked with a couple of other different people from other countries. And the numbers might vary a little bit, but for the most part, the issues are the same and the strategies seem to be the same as well. So we all know that regardless of where you're at, agriculture is one of the most dangerous occupations, not only in the United States, but pretty much in the world. And in the US, at least, it's one of the only, and it's the only work site in the US where children of any age can be present legally. And we know that just from working with, I know from working with people in other countries that we also have children in the work sites in those other countries as well. So in the United States, a child dies in an ag-related incident every 3 days, and every day about 33 children are seriously injured. Now, this is not falling down and scraping your knee injured. This is if they were an adult, they would be off of work injured type. We also know that in the United States, more youth die working in agriculture than in all other industries combined. And we know that a lot of those injuries are preventable, whether they're from working youth or non-working youth. So, as we said, agriculture is a highly dangerous work site. And now agritourism operators are bringing visitors into this work site, and they're bringing in visitors that are unfamiliar with the environment. At least with children who grow up on a farm, they are used to hearing the rules of being on the farm. You know, they're used to knowing what the equipment is. Now we're bringing in visitors that are not familiar with the farm, and many of them are small children. Um, sure. So your question was, is these children that are injured on farms every day, are these farm children or are these visiting children? And the answer is they're both. Okay. And you'll notice my second bullet point here on the handout is that 40% of the children who sustain those injuries are visiting. Okay. So caveat to that, this is not just visiting just because of agritourism. They might be visiting grandpa and grandma's farm. They might be going home with a friend from school, but only about 60% of the kids that are injured in the United States on a farm every day are actually farm kids. The rest of them are visiting in one way or another. Um, Adult visitors also sustain injuries. And of course, then there are worker injuries that we have to think about as well. An injury can and often does result in damages to the farm. And it typically, at least in the United States, it's going to impact your insurance. If it's a bad enough type of incident, we've seen farms close because of them. So it's something that we need to really think about, and we need to take steps to prevent. Um, so there are some issues with workforce and worker considerations, and we're not going to get into a lot of this today. But one of the things to just keep in mind in an area where we're moving into a little bit as well is worker safety. And there are issues whenever you bring in new hires. We bring in short-term and seasonal workers. Um, and then there are the issues that are brought up with our worker shortages as well. And so also changes in the workplace because of a leadership, maybe somebody retired and you got a new boss or a new manager. If you add new activities, and agritourism is a good one for this, we need to keep it moving. We need to keep it changing in order to keep attracting people to the farm or to the operation. And then there are other changes. Anytime you have a change in an operation, it can result in some pretty tough consequences in the workforce culture. You can start seeing conflict, competition between the new hires and the old hires sometimes. You can see uncertainty in what they're doing and a whole wide variety of other things that end up resulting in more stress and potentially impacting safety. So just some things that to think about. There are ways that we can address that, um, and address these issues. And some team training and some worker training actually can help address a lot of those issues. But for today, we're going to focus on visitor issues and on reducing liability for visitors. But just be aware of the fact that there is also things that are happening on the worker side that we will be looking at and addressing in future work. So focusing on visitor safety, what do you think we need to do focusing on visitor safety? Okay. Okay. Okay, so waivers. Okay. Okay, so we need to keep the focus on the visitor, keep the focus on the customer, think about their safety. I had a farmer that told me one night, he said, I do worry about liability, but he said, more importantly to me, I need peace of mind when I go to bed at night. He said, I need to be able to sleep with myself knowing I did the best I can to keep my visitors safe. And that was more important to him than the liability aspect. So that's a really good point. Engineer out risks as much as you can. If you can just eliminate them, that's the best way to do it. Mhm. Right after it happened, and I thought I got to fix that. And he said, I walked by it a couple days later and I thought, yes, I got to fix that. And he said, a few days after that, I walked by it and I thought, yep, it's still there. And then after that, I walked by it and I didn't even notice it anymore because it just became part of the farm. So absolutely having visitors or new eyes walk through is important. What else? Yep. Staff training is really important, and balancing the staff training. If I'm only hiring people for 2 months, how much time and effort am I going to put into training somebody? Am I going to put in 40 hours of staff training for somebody who's probably only going to work 120 hours total? So that's something you got to figure out as well. We have some ideas on where you can find some staff training materials. We'll share those later.
And not just training them, but empowering them to stop the track, kick somebody out, kick somebody off who's doing unsafe stuff. Often the $15 an hour employee doesn't feel like they have the power. And if they don't have the power, they're on a walkie-talkie or something to say, you're like, this guy will sit down on the hayride, whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
Give them a way to make sure it's safe and that they have the power for the crazy visitor who will not follow them.
Okay. So train them and empower them, and make sure that they have a way to communicate back with whoever the manager is. Those are 3 really good points. We'll get to a little bit more here. So, and I'm not moving again. Okay. So other answers I got: insurance, liability laws, activities, risks, safety strategies, documenting things, and some other stuff as well. So just a little bit of information. Some of the farmers will look at me and they'll say, why should I bother? And I just wanted to share this with you. So the cost of agricultural injuries on a regular farm, annual cost of occupational injuries is around $8.3 billion a year in the United States in medical costs and lost productivity. The cost of child and youth deaths is about 420 million per year. In $1 bills, US currency, if put end to end, that $8.3 billion would stretch around the Earth's equator 31 and a half times. Do you think it's worth investing in safety? Thinking specifically of visitor incidents, how would these costs change? Multiply by 40%. Because that's what the visitors are, yeah. So the thing is when you look at this, one of the things you'll notice is that this cost is medical costs and lost productivity. Now let's add the liability costs of somebody suing your operation to it, right? So there's that as well. So investing in safety, studies show that a good safety program will save $4 to $6 for every dollar that's invested. And I always show the farmers this and show them the statistics, and the studies have proven this, because the farmers will always tell me, I don't have the time and I don't have the money to do that safety stuff you're talking about. And I show them this and I say, you can't afford not to take the time and spend the money to do this. This is important. Okay. So that's just something to think about. Okay. Questions about safety issues on my farm and ranch. These are questions I've entertained from previous presentations and agritourism operators. How do I know what to look for? And it comes back to that story, the thing you brought up in the story I mentioned. I walk this farm every single day. It just looks like my farm. I don't see things. How do I see it when I walk by it every day? So I found something. What do I do about it? Or do I need to bother with all this? After all, we have an agritourism liability law, right? So I'm protected, right? I don't need to do anything. We'll talk more about that in a little while too. So this is normally where we'll do a small group discussions. We're not going to actually break into small groups, but the rest of this will apply. The following that we're going to cover are real incidents. You will note that sometimes there's more information that you're going to want to know than what I share with you. Most of these incidents came from news articles, so this is all the information that we have. So we're going to do all of these incidents. We're going to review the incidents, and then I'm going to ask you what questions come to mind. And then we're going to explore if it could have been prevented and if it could have, how you think it could have been prevented. So we have a playground incident on a play operation on the farm. So you mentioned earlier that some agritourism operations have play areas on them now. So a mother took her daughter to the park and the 8-year-old girl fell from the slide. She suffered a serious head injury. And we do know that there was sand underneath the slide. And this is not a picture of that. The incident didn't have a picture. I just threw this in there. This is actually my nephew and his son. So that's why it's not a girl. So what questions do you have about the incident? Where was the mom? Okay. She took him there, but it didn't say she stayed, right? How was she going down the slide? Or was she climbing up the slide, right? Good point. What else? Anybody else have any questions? The quality of the slide, what kind of shape was it in?
Is there any engineering data that something besides sand should have been used? It's safe.
Okay.
I can't think of anything softer, but maybe there is.
So is sand good ground cover? That's what they call the stuff that you put underneath playground equipment in order to be able to protect from a fall. Because if you fall from, you only have to fall from 4 feet to sustain a head injury on, even on grass. Okay. So that's why we put ground cover under playground equipment. And the answer to your question, by the way, is it depends. Sand can be adequate ground cover if it's deep enough and if it's not cold outside, because if sand is frozen, then it loses its cushioning ability. So it may have been fine if it was deep enough and if it wasn't wintertime that it was frozen. So any other questions? How old was the child? Okay. All good questions. What? Go ahead. Was there signage, playground rules listed? Good question. So questions, was there ground cover? We know there was, but later on in a follow-up story, we found out it wasn't deep enough. Okay. Was she playing on the equipment correctly? Somebody asked that question. Was she actually sliding down the slide or was she trying to climb up it or something like that? Was she being supervised closely? You guys also got that one. We know her mother took her to the park, but we don't know how closely she was watching her daughter. Because how many of us on agritourism operations have seen the parents out there and instead of watching their children, they're on their phone, right? Or they're talking to another parent. That's a big issue we get with chaperones in school groups, is either they bring other young children along with them and they're watching the younger kids instead of the kids they're assigned to, or they're on their phones or talking to other parents and they're not watching the kids at all. Could it have been prevented? What do you think? Perhaps, yeah. Okay, how? What do you think? What strategies could we have used to maybe prevent an injury from a fall on a slide? And somebody mentioned already posting playground rules that state you got to go up the correct way or use equipment correctly. What else? Could you repeat that, please? Have a worker or supervisor at the playground? Better ground cover? Yeah, the child wouldn't be able to, but the parent or the that should be accompanying them would be able to. And if they saw the child try to start climbing up the slide the wrong way, it would be their responsibility then to stop them and explain that how to use the equipment correctly, right? Yeah. We know the mom took her, but we don't know what happened after that. But we're saying, how could this have been prevented? So having the parent present along with the correct rules would hopefully help, maybe help mediate this. Yes.
Don't have anything over 4 feet.
Okay. You could not have anything higher than 4 feet. And that would be great if your kids were small toddler type size, but once they get older than that, they're not going to be happy with that. So, pardon? A roof for the slide would help prevent them from falling off the top, but not on the actual slide part itself. So if they were actually climbing up the actual slide chute, then it wouldn't have, but we don't know exactly what happened, but it would definitely help for that part of it. Okay. So I just wanted to show you this. Adequate ground cover we talked about before. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that you need ground cover on this all the way around your slide sets, not just in the front, okay? Because they can easily, not easily, but there's always the potential to fall from the side or to slide down the steps or something like that. The other thing that this was actually done, we worked with a agritourism operation in North Carolina, and this was their farm. And they actually did this. And she said to me later on, she said, this is a much prettier picture on our website for advertising than this is. So she said, not only did this safety improvement help us with safety, but it helped us with marketing as well. So that's something to think about as well. Signs posted, you guys got that. Children need supervision, you got that. Fencers or barriers, especially around that top part when they're standing at the top of the slide. These are things that play areas should have. Shaded areas for relief, warming shed if open in the winter, free from dust. So we're going to skip over this. So we have a farm market incident. A 14-year-old girl was visiting a fruit stand on the side of the road. There was a path that led from the driveway where they parked the cars to the stand. But on the way back to the vehicle, the girl stepped in a hole in or around the path. It's not really clear in the description, and she broke her ankle. Questions do you have? What questions? One more time. So your question was who had to take care of the street, and this is on private property. So it would be for the agritourism operator to maintain. Okay, yes. I heard I'm curious and then. So how was the hole created? We don't know for sure. It later came out, we don't know for sure if she was on the path or not. So it could have been from an animal, we're not sure. How long has the hole been there? Okay. Okay, that's a great one. You know, was it marked, and was the front of the farm stand marked so they knew exactly where they were heading for? You know, sometimes they're set at an odd angle and you're not sure where's the front. Okay. Was she looking ahead or was she looking at her phone? Sheila? Great point. Right. So what kind of shoes was she wearing? Because we know sometimes people will have flip flops on or something like that, or no shoes at all. And the second half you said was, what was she walking or running? Yes. All great questions. And you guys, I think, got most of them. Did she stay on the path? Was the path clearly marked? Was the path inspected regularly for holes, garbage, and other hazards? Was it dark? And was the path lighted? And was she paying attention? So you guys hit all those really good. Just as a little note, follow-up told us the patient did sue the visitor did sue the agritourism operation, but we didn't hear anything more after that. So we don't know if she was successful or not. Prevention. So you guys hit on a lot of the ways that this could have been prevented already. So I'm just going to whip through this a little bit. Walkways and paths should be smooth and level. So this type of thing, somebody's going to twist an ankle on, right? This would be much, much nicer for them to walk on. So we encourage agritourism operators to walk their paths every day, pick up garbage, pick up debris, look for holes, that type of stuff like that. And clearly mark all walkways and signs as well. So what do you see as an issue with this sign? Karen, do you recognize this sign? You shared this photo with me. Yes.
It says no, but it points them in the direction that they should not go.
Does it? Or is that the direction they should be going? Does anybody find this confusing? Yeah. And that's the problem with this sign. So if you're going to use signage, which is always a great idea, make sure that it makes sense. No visitors beyond this point. Does that mean no visitors in this direction? Does it mean no visitors behind the sign? What exactly does it mean? It's a little confusing, isn't it? So make sure that your signs communicate information very clearly. They're in good condition, don't fade, watch for vandalism, that type of stuff. Make sure they're posted in the right spots and make sure you account for color blindness, okay? Don't make a red sign on a green background because people that are colorblind are not going to be able to see it. And that's just one example of color blindness. These are just some other headlines, just to let you know that this wasn't a one-off incident, and there's a way, way more than that. Parking incident. The parking lot was full at the corn maze. Cars were parking along the road north of the maze. Because the cars parked along the road, there was little room for the vehicles. It was evening, dark outside. 4 people were walking along the road to the maze entrance and were hit from behind. The driver said he did not see them. A 19-year-old male was clipped by the truck and thrown into the 2 girls that were 21 years old, and a 23-year-old male was hit and tossed onto the windshield of the vehicle. Okay. The 19-year-old male had head and leg injuries. The 23-year-old male had 2 broken legs, a broken arm, a broken neck, and head lacerations. The 21-year-old female had a concussion and broken ribs, and the other 21-year-old female had a neck injury. No other follow-up was found after that. What questions do you have about the incident? How fast was the driver going? Okay, was it public or private roads, and was there lighting around there?
The road at the town or whoever's responsible for the road or the local enforcement, and anything to the farm before that can't have parking on the street, right? And they'd already been told.
Okay, so were they told that people couldn't park there? Was there any signage up? Yes.
The farm indicate where people should park, but if they did, was it parking alongside the road?
Okay, so did the farm actually indicate where people should park, either through signage on the farm or even on their website, right? Okay, anybody else? Yeah. Okay, so were the 4 college students sober and was the driver sober, right? Okay, all great questions. Was overflow parking available? You guys got the driver drinking? Was there a speed limit? Were the 4 walking, paying attention to the traffic, or were they talking to each other or looking at their phones? What were they visible? What kind of clothing did they have on? Was it all dark? Really good things. So ways to prevent this. I'm just going to go over this and we're going to move ahead a little bit. Provide adequate number of parking spaces. Overflow parking should be available. Use parking signs along the road, but you got to check ordinances. Okay. You may or may not be able to do that. You'll have to check with your township and see what your zoning laws are. And encourage guests to wear light colored clothing and use flashlights if they're coming out after dark. You may not have contact with every single one of your guests before they get onto your farm, but a lot of them will be out on your website looking at it, so you can put that information there. So there's some other ones. This is a haunted corn maze. The cool thing about this one, if there can be any cool thing about somebody who gets injured, is that the woman actually did file a lawsuit and lost the lawsuit because she actually paid to enter the scarier part of the maze. And it was obvious that the ground was muddy. And interestingly enough, and this is something agritourism owners should pay attention to, the owner had informed the insurance company of the activity prior to the incident, actually had the insurance company come out and take pictures of everything. So they actually shared all of this information back with the opposing attorney, and they took it into court. And so it actually helped them in beating the lawsuit. But the insurance agent actually told the people that they would have covered them anyway if they had lost the lawsuit, because they had the insurance agent come out and visit and everything was documented. So the take home message there, bring your insurance agent out onto your farms and let them see what you're doing. Some other headlines, and then we had some other cases. There's a petting zoo illness with E. coli here. Um, I will make sure that this PowerPoint gets put into the app so that you guys will be able to see these slides, because we're not going to have time to go over all of these. Couple things to mention though is make sure that you use signage and make sure that the signage is good. As we mentioned before, there's a couple food safety ones here. Hayride ones, and some other information as well on preventing those. Whoops, let me back up a little here. So going back to the question of I'm protected by the liability law, right? I posted the sign, which most in the United States, most of them cover or require the liability law. So what do you think? Are they covered? Do they need to do anything else? Right, you can't be negligent. And let me caveat this by saying that if you're in a state that doesn't have a liability law, you still want to do your best to follow best practices, because or in a country that doesn't have it. Because if you end up getting sued and you can prove that you did everything you could to make your operation safe, you're going to stand a lot better chances of beating that lawsuit and winning than if you didn't do anything, okay? So agritourism liability laws typically protect against inherent risks of agritourism activities. So if they're inherent dangers like the unpredictability of animals or the unevenness of land, that type of stuff like that. But they're not going to protect against willful or wanton disregard for safety of the participant or intentional injuries of the participant. So intentional injury of the participant. If somebody comes onto your agritourism operation and you take out a gun and shoot them, that's an intentional injury. You're not going to be covered for that, okay? However, what do they mean by willful or wanton disregard of the safety of a participant? And by the way, this is the Wisconsin liability law that I'm using as an example. But almost all of the liability laws in the United States and many across internationally have these same types of standards or caveats in them. So willful or wanton disregard is defined as conduct committed with an intentional or reckless disregard for the safety of others. So that really helps, doesn't it? Clear as mud, pretty much, huh? Such as failing to exercise ordinary care to prevent a known danger or discover a danger. So this is going to fly back to some of what you guys were talking about a little bit earlier in the presentation. What does it mean to exercise ordinary care? That means that you need to follow best practices. Okay, and again, the farmers will, the agritourism producers or operators will come back and they'll say, well, do I have to follow everything? Because I'm going to show you where you can find the best practices in a little bit. And they'll be like, do I have to follow everything? And it's like, again, we got that risk continuum, best practices here, doing nothing here. And it's your choice where you want to fall on that continuum, right? Okay. What does it mean to prevent a known danger? Fix hazards or safety issues that you know about that are identified. And what do we mean by a known danger? I'll give you an example. I was working with a farmer one time and he said he had a really beautiful farm market, just beautifully landscaped, gorgeous trees in the front yard in the front area of the farm market. The trees had some low hanging branches. And he said, every time a parent comes with kids, the kids start climbing the trees. That's not what the trees are meant for. And I'm afraid somebody's going to fall out of the tree and hurt themselves. And I said to him, what did you do to prevent that? That would be considered a known danger. You know about this. You know there's injury potential there. This is a known danger. What did you do to prevent this? And he said, well, I don't know. What do I need to do? And I said, where do you want to fall on the risk continuum? You can post a sign that says stay off the trees, or, do not climb, or whatever the case may be. That would be one way to do it. Or you can go all the way to the total end of it and you can fence off the trees so that they totally can't get to them. That's going to be a best practice, fencing off the trees. Okay. Or it's almost like engineering out the hazard. They can't get to it, right? So, but even posting a sign is better than not doing anything, because as soon as you post a sign that says don't climb the tree, now if they actually do climb the tree, they're disobeying the sign and technically they're trespassing. So that will provide you with some protection, but best choice is, of course, to fence off the tree. Again, the agritourism operator's choice. That's an example of preventing a known danger. What does it mean to discover a danger? That means you've got to inspect for hazards. You need to walk your agritourism operation every day, pick up all of the garbage that somebody left laying around, because we know visitors are never messy, right? Yeah. So, and we also know that if they leave stuff behind, people can trip over it, right? So whatever you have, you need to inspect, not necessarily daily on everything, but at the very least, you should walk the operation daily, do regular maintenance, and make sure that you inspect your play equipment and your different types of equipment that you have on a regular basis to make sure that there isn't nails sticking out, garbage isn't left behind, that type of stuff like that. So inspect for anything going wrong. Now, there's a website out there called safeagritourism.org that will teach you about best practices and assist you with identifying health and safety hazards on the farm. It also provides the resources you're going to need to fix a good majority of the things you're going to find. Okay. So there's what we call walkthroughs on there. And I'm just going to take you here and show you, this is an example of a walkthrough. Okay. It will ask you a question: should adults accompany children when they're on a hayride? And you can answer yes or no. Some of them are multiple choice, some are short answer. It varies a little bit. And then when you answer the question, it will bring up a picture that will show you what the correction should be. And then it will explain what the correction is. And then it will give you additional things to consider. And then if there are any resources associated with that, it will provide you with a link to that as well. So this will help explain to you exactly what you need to do in order to be able to comply with those best practices. There are checklists available on this website. We talked about walking through your operation and making sure that it's safe, but how do I know what to look for? The walkthroughs will help show you what you need to look for. The checklist will help you document whether you have something that needs to be fixed, and then document once you fixed it. So there's checklist doesn't only address the physical things like, is my slide still safe and is there screws sticking out of it, but also, do you have the appropriate policies and procedures in place that you need as well? And then it allows you to document all of your efforts as well. And then there are resources available as well. There's policies like incident policies, templates, there's signs. A lot of the signs are available in both English and Spanish. Some of them are bilingual. We're totally happy to translate these into other languages if you get a hold of us and provide us with the wording. And they're very attractive looking and they're free to use. You can either take them to your sign maker and have them use them, or you can print them off if you're a short season operation. You can print them off on cardstock and laminate them with a regular laminator, and they'll usually last your season that way. Okay, document everything. Okay, so if what the lawyers tell me is that if you get taken into court, you can say you have something as much as you want, but if it's not documented, they're going to consider it not done. So if you post a sign, take a picture of it and save it with a date on it. If you establish a policy, make sure that you have the policy written on the bottom, the date of the policy, and make sure it's reviewed every 6 months to every year, and that those reviews and revisions are documented as well and dated as well. And make sure that you train your employees as well on what your policies and procedures are, and document that training, because if it's not documented according to a code of law, it's not done. I'll come right back in just a minute. One other thing I wanted to mention, I did say something about training materials. There are links to training materials on that resource page, including, drawing a blank on the name of it right now. Carrie, help me out. Safer Faces? Safer Faces training, which is training for zoonotic disease prevention. So, and it's excellent for employees, and it's online, so it's easy for them to take it. Okay, question.
We talked a little bit about visiting, pets, coming with
Sure.
A couple of vegetable or, produce farms I know have put up, we love our dogs too. There's all safety reasons, they're using food safety, which they should, CAP certified.
Okay.
So what if somebody else's dog bites another visitor? What's the liability there?
It,
Not the risk of keeping visitors away because everybody
Yeah.
wants to bring the dog to the farm.
so the answer is it depends. Okay. You by law cannot keep service animals out. Okay. So if it's a service animal, you have to allow it. Okay. You do not by law have to allow therapy animals, however, but you have to figure out how to tell them apart because a lot of people with therapy animals will go online and order service vests for them. If you believe it is a service animal, you have to allow it. Okay. You don't have a choice. But you, most of the time, when there's incidents like you're talking about, they are not service animals. Service animals and even most therapy animals are trained very well. That's not usually a problem. Usually, if there's an animal incident, it's because a visitor brought a pet or it's the owner's own dog. Okay. So the recommendation is no matter how nice your own dogs are, if you own or manage an operation, you still want to keep them away from visitors because you don't know what the visitor is going to do. They might poke them in the eye, pull their tail. You just don't know. Okay. And especially when they start getting a lot of kids or a lot of people around them, dogs may not react the way you think they're going to. As far as visitors go, that signage that you mentioned is a very good idea. We have some owners that, we love our animals too. They put signs up, we love our animals too. But because of we have to take consideration of our other visitors, including allergies, we ask that you leave your animals behind. We've seen some signs that say service dogs welcome all other animals. We cannot allow, however, we cannot allow other animals to visit due to allergies and liability issues. So however you want to word your sign, best practices would say that you definitely get signs up that say that animals are not allowed unless they're service animals. And if they're service animals, they have to be in a vest. Okay. Otherwise, if you allow them on there, you're going to be liable. Other questions? That was a good one, by the way. Yes.
So I just wanted to comment because it didn't come up in your presentation. I'm a tour operator and part of my job is to vet the farms.
Mm-hmm.
And what these farmers don't understand is that when I step onto their property, they're releasing 50% of the liability. Because I have workers' comp, I have insurance, the bottom line, the clients paid me, not them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm the first line of defense. So part of our job is to work with the farmer, go out to the farm, and make sure we understand all the safety rules before we even get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how we've been very successful in doing agricultural tours. So that part of risk management, I just didn't hear that part of it, but the farmer should understand that. And I do require event insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Not commercial farming insurance.
Yes, that's, yeah. So that brings up a really good point for our online virtual attendees. What she mentioned was that when you bring in, and it may not be an exact fit here, but I'm going to use the word vendors onto the property, you want to make sure that they have appropriate insurance in place, not only for tour operators, but especially if you have people coming in and bringing food trucks and that type of stuff. You want to make sure that they have proper insurance, they have proper training, all of that type of stuff. But conversely, the flip side of that is true as well. If you're a farm tour operator, you're going to want to actually work with farms that do make an effort to be safe and make sure that those safety places are in place. There is sections on that Safe Agritourism website that do talk about insurance. There's an insurance discussion sheet on there. There's also a section that talks about communicating with guests. And that also has a handout on there for people who are doing school tours that advises chaperones on what their responsibilities are. And it intended to go out to the teachers to share with the chaperones. And it talks about things like don't bring extra young children along because it throws off the child to adult ratio and distracts you from the kids you're supposed to be watching. Don't stand around in groups and talk with the other parents. Don't be on your cell phone. It's a little bit more tactfully put than that, but you get the idea behind it. It really brings home that as a chaperone, your job is to watch the kids you're assigned to. And the reason that I developed that with some farmers is because some of the number one complaints for those that entertain school tours is that the chaperones don't watch the kids. They just come out and stand in a group and talk, or they're on their phones. So that's one of our most downloaded pieces of information on that site. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so I guess we're out of time, but if anybody has any additional questions, I'll be here for the rest of the week, and you can always post them on the app as well. Thank you for having me, and thanks for attending.